2019 and 2020 called From Commitment to Action. I just wanted to make you all aware that this session will be recorded. So I hope that everybody is okay with that. It is only for internal purposes. We look forward to having an active discussion with you. We'll have the first part will be some colleagues sharing thoughts and insights from their experiences with the From Commitment to Action work that we did. And then after that, we'll be going into breakout groups. We do encourage you to share your thoughts and any questions that you have in the chat. During the panel discussions, there will be time for questions after each presentation. So if you have, while you're thinking of your questions, put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them as we go along. And then we'll have the presenters also take some time to answer those. If you'd like to jump in at any point, please raise your hand. The button you will find in the bottom panel near the reactions. So we'll know who wants to jump in. So once again, thank you for joining our community. It's got our Green Commodities community has a very packed schedule of events. So we do encourage you to join us if you're not already members. We assume many of you who are here today, of course, are members, and that's how you've known, but there's plenty more events. So please do encourage colleagues to join as well. My name is Christina Archer. I work with the Green Commodities Programme, and I was leading the From Commitment to Action initiative. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. I'd like to know a little bit more about who we have on the call, on the webinar with us today. So if you could just take a couple of minutes and in the chat, write your name, where you're currently based, and where you work. So just a couple of minutes so we can do a quick introduction and we can see who else is with us today. We're already spanning 3 different continents, so it's great to see such an international crowd with us today, again reflecting the nature of our Green Commodities community. So fantastic to see so many of you here on the webinar with us today. So we have colleagues from Latin America with us, but colleagues staying up late in Indonesia to join us. Appreciate the fact that you could make time to join us today. Really lovely to see you here. Other European colleagues as well. So those that haven't had a chance, looking forward to hearing who's with us today. Of course, if we had a chance, it'd be great to hear what commodities you're working on and what is the work that you're doing that's linked to deforestation and commodities. And hopefully next time we have one of these events in the near future, we'll be able to do them in person. So thank you for taking the time to introduce yourselves to your colleagues. If we could have the slides now, please, Federica. So I don't know how many of you had a chance to follow the links that were attached to the invitation and delve into the report that we produced. It's on the Green Commodities Programme website. But I'll give you a quick update and briefing on the From Commitment to Action initiative, what spurred it, what it made us do this, why we thought it was an interesting project to be involved in. And then we're going to hear some of the reflections from participants from the 3 focus countries on how they found From Commitment to Action in practice and how they've been using it since the work was completed. That's going to be about half of today's webinar. The other half is an opportunity for you all to reflect on what you've heard, and especially if you are working with programs, with partners in your own government programs, in your own organizational programs on deforestation for commodity supply chains. We'd love to hear you, give you a chance and hear your thoughts about how what we've heard will influence the way that you do your work in the future. If you go to the next slide, please. So From Commitment to Action was a flagship program that we have. We know that many companies, many governments have made commitments around deforestation. There's some very ambitious targets that were set, many of them around 2020 that we know just haven't been met. There's been some amazing progress over the years, of course, a lot of investments gone in, both through the private sector and the public sector, trying to deliver on those commitments, but there's still such a long way to go. So we were curious to find out, why is that? Why, after so long and so many investments and so much time, we still are struggling to meet those commitments? Our work didn't look at drivers of deforestation. There's been a lot of work on that. Many of you on the webinar today have done, a huge amount of work on that. So I think we pretty much know what a lot of those drivers are. We know what they are. We know investment's been made, but we know that there's still, progress is lacking, and we need to sort of really step up. So what's been impeding this? So the idea of From Commitment to Action was to look at what does it take to move from commitment to action and make a reality of the commitments and actually accelerate this reduction in deforestation that we're still seeing. The program focused on Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, all three countries signatories of the New York Declaration on Forests, and also with UNDP country programs that are playing a really active role in this space. So that's where the initiative was started, and my thanks to the teams that worked with us on this. The program looked at just taking stock of where we are and developing a roadmap in collaboration with actors. So the works are really focused on trying to see what are the commitments that have been made, what are the investments that have been done, and by investments we mean not only resource and financial, but what are the laws and policies that have been put in place by the government? What are some of the policies that have been in place by supply chain actors as well? So what is being done in order to fulfill the commitments? But then crucially, where are there still some gaps, and what could be actions in order to try and close those gaps? So where do we need to step up in order to help close those gaps? So that was the rationale. Next slide, please. We encourage, and UNDP has a long tradition in working in multi-stakeholder collaboration, and that's something very much at the heart of this initiative as well. The Green Commodities Programme has this at its core of the way that we implement work around commodity platforms and so on. But what is effective multi-stakeholder collaboration ultimately for systemic change? We try to also bring this into the From Commitment to Action process, and in the three pilot countries, this was done in different ways depending on the national context. So there was a series of national and in some cases subnational dialogues that happened. There was a lot of consultation and coordination with key partners, especially governments. And what we have was 3 different roadmaps, one for each country, which are available on the website in Spanish and some of them in English as well. Each one of these roadmaps then shows and has taken stock of, as I said earlier, what are the existing commitments by the government and the private sector, where possible, and what is everybody doing to reduce deforestation from commodity production in that country, against some criteria that we know are essential for the enabling environment. What are the policies that are being taken? What is the action being taken by, especially the public sector, but where we knew about it in the private sector as well, that is supporting or hindering the achievement of the deforestation as a result of commodity footprints. And then also trying to, and this was a very big job, so by no means complete, but trying to see where we have already some budgets, initiatives, resources that have been allocated, and trying to identify then where some of these gaps would be. Next slide, please. We summarized the very different results that came from the 3 different countries. As you can imagine, the context in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador is really quite different. Some of the drivers for deforestation might be similar, but the way that it's being tackled in each country does vary, and the way that we're able to do the work in each country vary. But there were some common themes that came out, which are summarized in the Commitment to Action report that you'll find on our website. We found that, and this is just some examples because there's many lessons learned there really, but what we found is one of the key points is that we really do need to think more systemically around this. Traditionally, when we're working on deforestation, we will work with Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, but actually there's a lot of other actors that have an impact on this that we need to be bringing into the discussions. We need to be looking at the geographies and making sure that national policy levels do trickle down to and are resourced at regional and local level. Again, this won't be new to many of you. There's an issue as well around sanctions and where laws and regulations do exist, that they are actually enforced properly. We found that was a gap in many of the countries. And actually looking at different models where we are starting to value forest as an economic resource, not just as a hindrance, and also making sure that private sector is also valuing good examples of supply chains that are not contributing to deforestation. Next slide, please. So today, as I said, we have a great panel for you, and they're going to share their insights from working with the From Commitment to Action initiative. And while you're listening to them, I'd like to encourage you to also think for your work, how can you and your partners think more systemically about what is needed to be done to achieve deforestation targets, which are present, as we said, either in governments or within supply chains and private sectors. Well, what do we need to do? Who else could you be talking to, or should you be talking to if you're working with a multi-stakeholder process? Are they just the traditional actors there? Could you and should you be talking to others, and who could they be? We know that a national system is really complex. So how is it working against you, maybe in some cases? You know, maybe looking at other ministries that we don't traditionally engage with, you can actually see that some of their policies or practices are actually in contradiction to what you're trying to do with partners in Ministry of Environment and Agriculture, as an example. And then also, what are the kind of more perceptions around forests by many of the communities that we're engaged with, who, you know, will tend to favor clearing forest area or not seeing forests as a driver for growth, but quite the opposite. So just bear those thoughts in mind, and those are kind of issues that we're going to talk through in the breakouts later. Next slide, please. So I've got a fantastic panel today, all women panel, I'm pleased to say. We have representatives, as I said, from the 3 different countries that took part in the program. But I'd like to, first of all, call on Claire Paz, who is working with the UNDP Climate and Forest Program, but is also working with the New York Declaration on Forest team as well. Claire is doing something that not many of us have done recently. She's taking a flight today, so she's on a tight schedule. So I want to make sure that we hear some thoughts from her. Claire has over 20 years experience of working with in developing countries with multilateral programs, has worked on RED programs, her native country of Bolivia as well with Conservation International, and is a specialist in conservation, planning and natural resource management. Claire, I'll give you the floor. And just to say, everybody, again, if you have some questions, please put them in chat for Claire. She'll talk for about 5 or 7 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions on what she said. So Claire, over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Can you hear me okay? Is it working?
Very good.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, and thanks so much to the Green Commodities community to inviting me to this very interesting panel. As Christina said, apologies, I'm in an airport, so there's some noise, background noise, so apologies in advance for that. My name is Claire Paz Rivera. I work supporting the work of the New York Declaration on Forests, as Christina mentioned. The New York Declaration on Forests is a voluntary political declaration that includes 10 ambitious goals, all contributing to the overarching goal of aiming to end deforestation by 2030. And among the 10 goals, goal 2 aim to support the private sector goal of eliminating deforestation from the production of agricultural commodities, including palm oil, soybean, paper, and beef products by no later of 2020. So as you all can imagine, this 2020 goal 2 has not been met. We carry out an independent assessment report that is conducted by NYDF assessment partners. And that assessment report showed that, the goal has not been met, and it identified a number of contributing factors that have already been mentioned partially by Christina in her intervention that explain why this goal hasn't been met. So some of the key messages from this report include that supply chain efforts have of course, as anticipated, not been successful in eliminating deforestation from the production of agricultural commodities. And although the rate of deforestation due to commercial agriculture had declined in some geographies, in general, it has increased at a global level. It also showed that more than half of the companies that were assessed by initiatives that track private sector commitments have made a public commitment, either through the New York Declaration on Forests or through other commitments to address deforestation. So around 55% to supplychain.org and 60% to Forest 500. Those are initiatives for addressing deforestation from agricultural commodities. And this company, so on the commitment side, we are not so bad. Of course, there's still a lot to be done, but there's a significant number of companies that have made this public commitment. However, when we look into implementation, the picture is very different. First of all, assessing the quality of implementation of these commitments is very challenging because there are different methodologies, metrics to be used, and more importantly, not all companies are disclosing what they are doing to fulfill their commitments. So what the assessment is showing, and my colleague Maddie is going to share in the chat the link to this Goal 2 assessment report. What this report shows is that in some geographies, again, it's easier to assess the progress on implementation. For example, in Southeast Asia with palm oil and pulp, but in other geographies like Latin America, it's much more challenging to look into implementation on cattle and soy supply chains. Also, the report looks into the demand side measures. So a large number of companies based on Europe and North America have announced their commitment to set some requirements for their upstream suppliers to address deforestation. So we've been seeing this as a positive signal. However, there is a risk that other markets that are not setting the same standards are going to drive, so there's going to be a displacement and deforestation linked commodity production is going to shift to those other markets. We also saw that forest monitoring and supply chain traceability technologies have evolved at a very rapid pace, and this is very important because monitoring is a very important element for implementation. However, tracking the engagement it's easier. It's limited to until immediate suppliers, but it's much harder when you want to really do traceability at the producer level or at reaching the million of smallholders that are part of commodity supply chain production. Lastly, a large number of companies fail to report their progress on their commitments, so they have not disclosed. So around 1/3 of the 350 most influential companies in forest risk commodity supply chains did not disclose their information. This is information until 2020 on how they are advancing in their commitments. Having said all these key messages, and as we look this year into refreshing the New York Declaration on Forests, because we've been hearing consistently from endorsers and from key stakeholders that the declaration is still relevant, and the 2030 targets are still relevant, considering that we are in the last critical decade to address the climate crisis and to address deforestation at a global level. We're looking into really tackle what are those barriers that are limiting to move from commitment to action. Therefore, I think it's very, very timely to count with reports like the From Commitment to Action report that is showing on a country-specific manner how we can move forward on addressing implementation, what are the barriers. So we welcome very much this report and the lessons from Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, and we hope this could inform to advance implementation in other geographies and to move forward to renew efforts to a new goal 2 that will probably now have a 2030 revised target as we complete the revision process until the end of 2021. So with that, I'm going to close my intervention. Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, all colleagues. And I'm so honored to be in this wonderful panel of all women, some of them my friends. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And also, Claire, you are part of the steering committee from Commit to Action and brought in, hugely valuable insights and, contributed to the final report and so on. So my thanks to you personally. I think one of the things I remember you telling me early on, which really stuck with me, was we don't need more commitments. We have the commitments. We just need to deliver on them now. And that's exactly what we hope the tool of From Commitment to Action can help. And I think that with our presentations coming up, we will hear how the countries have managed to put into action some of the recommendations that came out of that process. As you said, quite timely with a refresh of the NYDF. And again, for colleagues on the call who are looking to engage with actors who are looking at the next decade and making a reality of deforestation commitments, we hope that the experience that we did in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia will help you look at things in a slightly different way and can add value to that. We do have a couple of minutes of Claire's time before she has to rush onto her first flight in a long time. So please do put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. And I'd ask Alex if you can also help me identify people, or if you have any questions you'd like to pop in the chat. But let's take advantage of Claire while we still have her on the call now. So yeah, feel free to jump in, anyone. Alex, do we have any hands up? I can't see.
Not yet.
Don't be shy, everyone. I think if not, I'm just conscious of time, Claire. So we've got Maddie with us as well, your colleague Maddie from NYDF, for the rest of the webinar. So if there are questions that come up, then hopefully she can help answer as well. But thank you very much for giving that framing around why it still is so important to be thinking in a different way about how we can make a reality of the commitments we'll make. Frederica, if we could have the slide presentation back up again, please. And it's a great honor to have with us today Karina Barrera, who is the Undersecretary of Climate Change from the Ministry of Environment, Water, Ecological Transition from the government of Ecuador. UNDP in Ecuador is closely involved with the Pro Amazonia program. So the Pro Amazonia team were our main counterparts for the From Commitment to Action work that we did in Ecuador. And of course, they work completely hand in hand and very closely with the Ministry of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition. Karina has over 20 years of experience also in environmental issues, circular economy programs. She's worked across public sector, private sector and civil society in the whole breadth of the country, all the way from the Amazon regions to the Andean regions. And again, all the way from design to evaluation of programs. So huge experience that you bring to this, Karina. Karina will be speaking in Spanish. So for those of you who are not familiar with Spanish or don't want to practice your Spanish, you can press on the button on the bottom right that says interpretation, and you can hear it in English. Karina, it's a pleasure to have you today. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. Adelante, por favor.
Thank you. I'm Karina Barrera, Undersecretary of Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition. I'm just to say this introduction, and my presentation is in English, is in Spanish, sorry. I have, maybe, could you help me with the presentation? I have some slides for you. Thank you. Next, please.
Karina, you can say next or avance, and Federica will show the next slide. Great.
Gracias. El ejercicio de recibir este reporte que nos muestra la posición en la que estamos respecto al manejo sostenible de los commodities ha sido de gran utilidad para el gobierno. Es importante saber que el Ecuador ha iniciado un camino hacia una transición ecológica que implica habilitar diferentes espacios a nivel de todos los sectores de la función pública para movernos hacia modelos de desarrollo y producción sostenible y consumo sostenible también. En ese sentido, este informe que hemos recibido para nosotros es de gran valor. Nos ayuda a saber en qué posición estamos, cómo estamos con respecto a otros países y qué necesitamos hacer para avanzar. Siguiente, por favor. Mirando el diagnóstico general nos hace notar que estamos primeros en lo que se refiere a la certificación de palma sostenible. Estamos trabajando a nivel jurisdiccional, todavía habilitando ciertos espacios con 2 provincias en el Ecuador, Orellana y Sucumbíos en la Amazonía. Y por otra parte, estamos trabajando con pequeños productores, ya en procesos de capacitación específicos para llegar a esta certificación. Dentro del informe se muestran algunas brechas que se han identificado, particularmente en la articulación de la política hacia niveles subnacionales. Creo que es algo común entre los países. Tenemos una política pública que todavía se maneja a nivel general, sin embargo no hemos podido poder transversalizarla entre los diferentes actores. Nos hace falta todavía trabajar en el tema de los mercados, porque si bien es cierto, estamos desarrollando políticas para fortalecer las cadenas de valor priorizadas en el Ecuador, que son la palma, el café, el cacao y la ganadería. Aún nos hace falta poder encontrar mercados que valoren el esfuerzo de trabajar en sistemas libres de deforestación. Y en ese sentido, es importante también saber cómo el Ecuador ha podido estructurar su política pública relacionada a estos temas libres de deforestación. Vamos a la siguiente diapositiva. Solo quiero resaltar que el Ecuador tiene el plan de acción Red Más, desde el 2016, que establece la estrategia para el manejo y la gestión de los bosques con 4 líneas grandes. La generación de política pública, habla de la producción sostenible, los temas de conservación y restauración y el manejo forestal sostenible. Pero tiene una particularidad este plan de acción Red Más, que no está hecho con un enfoque territorial, sino con un enfoque de paisaje. Y con un enfoque muy fuerte al tema de salvaguardas. En otros países el enfoque de Red Más es por territorio. Aquí rebasamos los territorios y nos enfocamos en paisajes, que es mucho más extenso. Y está todo esto enmarcado, bueno, dentro de nuestros compromisos internacionales. Siguiente, gracias. Bueno, siguiente. Con respecto a qué hemos hecho como país con respecto al informe que recibimos, bueno, es contarles algunos avances que hemos tenido en este tiempo y cómo nos estamos enfocando. Por una parte, hemos definido el concepto país, de qué significa para nosotros el tema de producción sostenible en los commodities, ¿no? Y hemos podido establecer los conceptos de bosque, establecer los conceptos como Ministerio del Ambiente respecto a qué es producción libre de deforestación y por otra parte para el MAC, que son buenas prácticas agrícolas. Entonces el reto ha sido poder conjugar estos dos temas, cómo hacer para producir de la mejor manera y cómo hacerlo libre de deforestación. Entonces estos conceptos se han establecido entre las dos instituciones. Y en el año 2019, a través de los 3 ministerios, Agricultura, Comercio Exterior y Ambiente, se sacó esta marca, Ecuador Premium and Sustainable, y se inició un proceso de definiciones, ¿no? En el 2020 hemos trabajado en tener un acuerdo ministerial, es un instrumento de política, un instrumento legal que nos ha permitido definir algunas líneas importantes sobre qué acciones va a ejecutar el Ministerio de Agricultura, el Ministerio del Ambiente y estandarizar los conceptos que mencioné. Estamos trabajando y construyendo esta normativa donde establecemos justamente las interacciones entre los dos ministerios y hemos hecho procesos de consulta y participación para incluir a los diferentes sectores. Entonces, hoy nos encontramos, tenemos ya un instrumento acordado entre las partes y estamos en proceso ya de emisión y ya implementación de este acuerdo ministerial para la producción de bienes libre de deforestación. Sigamos, por favor. Y en este marco, avancemos, gracias. Bueno, es importante mirar las cosas que hemos hecho, es un caso de estudio, hemos avanzado en la cadena justamente de café, con 2 asociaciones piloto, ASOCRIM y APECAP, donde estamos trabajando en tener una línea base de cómo estaban trabajando estas fincas, donde los mismos finqueros identificaron cuáles son las áreas en donde ellos están trabajando en la producción, además de identificar las buenas prácticas agrícolas para que su trabajo pueda ser valorado. A partir de eso se identificaron los centros de acopio con los diferentes estándares que se tienen que cumplir a nivel de calidad, para además tener un convenio con la BATSA, que es lo más importante. Tenemos ya un comprador, que es la BATSA, que quiere comprar justamente esta producción de café, porque ese era el principal reto que enfrentábamos, ¿no? O sea, ¿a quién le vamos a vender este producto sostenible? Entonces, en el caso del café, ya tenemos este comprador, la BATSA, y la producción de estas 2 asociaciones se ha preparado con los estándares de calidad de la BATSA y por otra parte hemos tenido ya una línea base para saber cómo están los bosques y si es que a lo largo del tiempo se va a generar o no deforestación, de tal manera de poder crear y que ellos sean parte del incentivo, porque el Ministerio del Ambiente lo que está haciendo aquí es entregar un incentivo, una distinción de punto verde que dice que esta producción es libre de deforestación y por otra parte Agricultura va a decir que esta producción cumple las buenas prácticas agrícolas. Entonces, con este caso de estudio hemos cerrado la cadena completa, donde integramos el mercado, los actores diferentes y con las 2 visiones, agricultura y ambiente. Bueno, tenemos aún varios retos que cumplir, ¿no? Justamente esta interacción requiere aún de recursos, requiere además la misma comprensión de los temas en todos los niveles. Entonces, estamos aún trabajando, pero creo que una de las cosas buenas que se está haciendo también es poder fortalecer el tema de incentivos y en este caso estamos trabajando con el Ministerio de Agricultura en firmar un convenio para crear mecanismos de compensación para créditos agropecuarios y forestales libres de deforestación. Esta línea es muy importante. También a través de otros proyectos, el BID y CONAFIPS, que involucra a una serie de cooperativas de ahorro y crédito que ya van más a nivel de territorio, se están promoviendo este tipo de financiamiento. Entonces, estas líneas también de incentivos que tienen ciertas preferencias, pensamos que va a apoyar de manera fehaciente a lograr los resultados que nos proponemos. Bueno, es un camino que recorrer y creo que estos informes también nos ayudan periódicamente a saber cómo estamos y cómo avanzamos. Eso, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. No sé si hay una... avanzamos. No, ya está. Muchísimas gracias, Karina. Creo que usted ya tocó en algunos de los temas que salieron en el informe, ¿no es cierto? Ese caso de incentivos ha salido muy fuerte, ¿no? Que en este momento todavía no hay incentivos del mercado, del sector privado, para los commodities que provienen de cadenas que son libres de deforestación. Entonces, la experiencia que ya están haciendo con la base sería muy interesante de ver cómo podemos aprender de esto. También el punto que usted mencionó de cómo podemos llevar las políticas que ya la tenía el gobierno de Ecuador a nivel nacional a un nivel más de territorio, muy interesante. Y esta cuestión de cómo se puede tener definiciones, conceptos estandarizados entre los ministerios y los actores. También es una cosa que salió muy fuerte en el informe. So that was a really great insight from a government perspective, how they have taken the work from Commitment to Action and the report that was done, the roadmap that was produced in conjunction with the Pro Amazonia team, and taken some of the recommendations, as you just heard from Karina, to be integrated into their work and into new work plans as well, specifically the issues around standardization of concepts, taking policies and practice down to a landscape level as well. So for us, of course, UNDP works very much with governments as a partner. So to hear how one of our government partners has found this extremely useful is very encouraging. And we thank Karina and her colleagues for their support with this initiative. Again, any questions for Karina and the work that's happening in Ecuador, or how she's found working with the FC2A report and its conclusions, or some of the points that she elaborated on? If you have any questions or clarifications, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. Karina, I think your presentation was so clear and full of great information. It was, yeah, so no clarifications. I think we have no questions there, but thank you very much for that. It was really, as I said, very interesting to hear how a government has taken on the report and the roadmap and made a reality of that. Federica, if we could go back then to the presentation. Oh, we do have a question, apologies, before we jump to Jimena. Jorge Sainz, Jorge, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and if you could turn your video on as well, it'd be great to see you. And then after that, we have John Buchanan. And again, if we could see you as well, but Jorge first, thank you.
I read a question said, how are we trying to coordinate the regional levels? Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
Where's Jorge?
I don't know. I read this.
Yeah, Jorge, would you like to? I can see you now, Jorge. Would you like to maybe just say the question to Karina? Just explain it maybe a bit more fully in Spanish or in English.
Thank you, Cristina. Karina, good presentation. Thank you. My question is about already for the government of Ecuador to kind of put in the same way the national government initiatives with the regional initiatives, and each support they can in the process, for take these concepts of sustainability in the agricultural activities. This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Estamos trabajando en generar los planes de ordenamiento territorial a través justamente de Proamazonía. Es uno de los componentes, trabajar en la política pública. Los planes de ordenamiento territorial generan el marco de acción de cada uno de los gobiernos seccionales, ¿no? Esto nos permite que ellos ya desde su planificación incorporen estas prácticas. Eso por una parte. Por otra parte, creo que algo importante que se ha podido lograr es tener los planes de implementación a nivel local. Por ejemplo, hace poco aprobamos un plan de implementación de un gobierno provincial donde se replican a nivel local todas estas prácticas planificadas a nivel nacional. Entonces, este plan ya les permite a ellos tener un límite donde dice cuál es el desarrollo que van a tener en términos de conservación, en términos de uso sostenible de los recursos forestales y cómo además van a incorporar estas buenas prácticas de productos libres de la deforestación. Entonces, estas diferentes herramientas nos han permitido, o bueno, estamos trabajando para poder llegar a través de eso a los gobiernos locales.
Gracias, Karina. John?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Karina, for your presentation. And I had a question on private sector engagement, and if you said this and I missed it, my apologies, but you gave a good example of engagement from the coffee sector, and I was wondering if you could say a bit more about engagement from other sectors, cacao or palm oil. How is the private sector engaging you and supporting you in these plans? And do you have any thoughts on what more we need from the private sector to help you take these programs to scale? Thank you.
Lo que está sucediendo con nosotros en este momento es un diferente nivel de progreso en las otras cadenas, en las diferentes cadenas de valor. Hoy estamos priorizando dos cadenas. Estamos trabajando con la palma sostenible. En el tema de la palma, creo que el papel del sector privado es muy importante. El tema de poder realizar primero el alineamiento y la visión, ¿no? En estas inversiones que se tiene que realizar, los productores de palma están empezando de alguna manera a capacitarse. Con las escuelas de campo estamos trabajando con los pequeños productores. Posiblemente nos está haciendo falta con los pequeños, entonces de esta forma están involucrándose a parte del sector privado. Creo que en el tema también de los otros commodities que manejamos, estamos también trabajando con algunas iniciativas de implementación de sistemas de trazabilidad. Entonces también hay un sector privado que está aprendiendo, que está iniciándose en esto. No todavía con toda la fuerza que queremos, pero tiene un potencial también en fortalecer estos temas. Creo que con el cacao también se están haciendo varias iniciativas, pero también estamos en una fase todavía temprana de poder articular a los productores de cacao. Creo que el primer paso para mover e incorporar toda la acción privada es poder nosotros emitir estos acuerdos ministeriales, esta norma, y poder incorporarlos y sentarlos en las mesas de trabajo, ¿no?
And the private sector is something that I know Diana from the UNDP Peru team is going to speak of, and in the breakouts we'll have a chance to talk in more depth about that. Thank you, Karina, for your intervention. We'll move on now to Jimena, please. Thank you so much, Karina. Can we have the slides back, please? So it's my pleasure to invite now Jimena Puyana from UNDP Colombia. Jimena also has 20 years experience of working in rural development and environmental issues. She's been working with UNDP for a number of years now, specifically focusing on adaptation, mitigation, climate change, looking at biodiversity as well, is one of the focal areas that she's been working on. And was a great supporter and helped us a lot in the From Commitment to Action work in Colombia. Jimena, over to you. Jimena is also going to do her presentation in Spanish, so you have your interpretation button. And Jimena, if you can say next for Federica, she'll advance the slides. Thank you so much, Jimena.
Okay, Cristina, thank you very much. I am going to try in English. And thank you for inviting me to this presentation. Hello, everyone. I am going to talk about the From Commitment to Action program approach in Colombia. Second, please. Next, please. Are you seeing the presentation? Should I share my screen?
They're just starting again. It's okay.
Okay, good. Well, then I am going to refer to first to From Commitment to Action in Colombia, the roadmap, then how this approach was used in our Amazon Sustainable Landscapes program in Colombia, which is a JEF program. And finally, I am going to present some results that we have. Next, please. Okay. Currently, we are working to accelerate the reduction of deforestation that can be triggered by agricultural products in regions with high value forests like the Amazon. However, it is important to notice that in this region, it's not possible to speak of larger commodity producers in Colombia, as happened in other regions of Colombia. What exists in the Amazon region, besides of the largest portion of Colombian forest, is or are small and medium producers and entrepreneurs who are dedicated to livestock activities and to develop some dairy products. So what we are trying to do is to reduce deforestation through the integration of key stakeholders from dairy and beef value chain. Next, please. Okay. And what is the roadmap we are following in Colombia? We have like 3 dimensions, all of them related to the implementation of the peace agreement, because as it's wider known, after the signing of the peace agreement, of the peace accord in Colombia, deforestation increased rapidly, and these 3 dimensions are very related with the prevention of this deforestation in the country. The first dimension is the stabilization of the agricultural frontier. The second is the territorial planning. And third, the national zero deforestation agreements. For the first one, we are working at the national level with the post-conflict agency, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Agriculture to adopt zero deforestation guidelines in the supply chains and to integrate forest productivity in the territorial economical level. Then for the territorial planning, we are working at the regional level with the departments, secretaries of agricultural and planning to incorporate land tenure and use planning issues into public policy, considering the sustainability of the land and sustainable use of biodiversity. We are also trying to develop the incentive payment framework for the environmental protection in order to promote, of course, zero deforestation. And finally, the national zero deforestation agreements. We are working at national, regional, and also at local levels with dairy and beef buying companies to integrate cooperation projects in strengthening supplier to identify supply areas of the companies in order to strengthen the supply network for achieving zero deforestation from interested companies. Next, please. Now we are going to see how do we contribute to the From Commitment to Action roadmap. We work to achieve zero deforestation in 3 different productive systems. First, one regarding forest management and sustainable use of forests and its biodiversity associated. Second, agricultural and livestock systems. And we have some challenges that were identified for each of them. In case of forest protection and sustainable use, the challenges are, first, the integration of all linkages within the value chain around the common goal of stopping deforestation. Second, the identification of agrobiodiversity and biodiversity species for commercialization. Third, the incorporation of innovation and added value that came from the sustainable use of forests in this territorial planning. And then to strengthening of local organizations and companies. Regarding the agricultural and livestock systems, the challenge responds to the incorporation of best practices, the implementation of conservation tools to improve connectivity in productive landscapes, adaptive and resilient land planning, and the management of conflicts between biodiversity and production, like traditional productive systems. Next, please. And what are some results that we have to date with the approach of our Amazon Sustainable Landscapes program? For example, we have recognized natural assets such as forests as potential drivers of sustainable economic growth. So we work with 3 forest nuclei, and we have identified 32 species from natural non-timber products. We have managed to get 250 farms to implement conservation tools. And there is also currently 458 hectares with agreements for protection, restoration, and production reconversion. And we have developed an international, a wider marketing strategy known as Product of Peace to connect local producers and entrepreneurs for the commercialization of sustainable products that came from the Amazon. Equilibrio project, for example, is one of them that connect 350 suppliers of natural ingredients with processing companies and anchor companies of the processed food, pineapple, dairy, and cosmetic industries that work with the Ministry of Commerce. In conclusion, I would say that we have been working under a focus of restoring areas and diversifying production units, seeking to implement best practices in conventional production systems, but also the offer of products that can be obtained from the sustainable use of the forests and, of course, the biodiversity that is associated to these kind of ecosystems. Next, please. Well, some lessons learned. As we see, the approach is to develop a sustainable productive models that integrate the sustainable use of lands and the sustainable use of biodiversity. The systemic approach promoted by the FC2A program and the lessons learned by our country office in Colombia and Colombia, not just our country office, but also that we shared with the government, includes also a landscape approach and the need to work in a coordinated fashion with various public and private institutions like the Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Agricultural Affairs, as well as the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Post-Conflict, in order to promote the sustainable use of land management through sectoral public policies. Also, it was evident to us the need to quickly articulate with local authorities, I mean administrative departments and municipalities, in the zero deforestation agreements, such as like the beef and dairy zero deforestation agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimena. I personally found the Colombia work super interesting because it did give us some of the key insights that are in the report, as you just mentioned in your last slide, about working with other actors. So to hear that you're now working with the Ministry of Commerce is a great example of how you've taken one of the lessons that came out of the FC2A process, where you, by having a mapping done to show what ministries are doing what, showed that these other ministries maybe have policies that aren't helping the work being done around deforestation. So the fact you've brought them in now is a great example of that more systemic approach to who we involve in the multi-stakeholder dialogues. So thank you for sharing those examples. And also I particularly like that, you know, we're now looking at other products in the landscape. How can we add value to the forests? If we have any quick questions, otherwise I know we're running slightly behind and that's my fault, my apologies, but they're so interesting, the presentations, I can't cut them short. But if there's any clarification questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise we can move on. I'll just give you a quick minute. I don't see any hands raised. I know we have other colleagues from UNDP Colombia, so you might get a chance in the breakouts to also ask some questions there. Jimena, thank you again very much for that. I'll move on now to
Cristina, you're muted.
Sorry, I was going to say we're going to move on now to Diana. So thank you very much to Jimena. We are going to speak now with Diana from UNDP Peru. Diana is an economist with over 15 years experience of working in rural development across countries in the Andean region and including Venezuela as well. And since 2016, she's been managing the Amazon Sustainable Development Programs for UNDP Peru. And Diana will now tell us about From Commitment to Action in Peru. Over to you, Diana.
Gracias, Cristina. Buenos días con todos. Muchas gracias por esta invitación y por permitirnos compartir un poco lo que ha sido la experiencia en este proceso que hemos llevado a cabo durante el año pasado y a partir de ello algunas lecciones aprendidas y quizás buenas prácticas que puedan ayudar a continuar con este trabajo bastante importante y especial para los países, ¿no?
Diana,
bueno,
su video creo que está apagado. No sé si sería posible prenderlo porque...
ok, dame un segundo.
Sí, no, sí.
¿Está prendido ahora sí?
Perfecto, gracias.
¿Sí? ¿Y ahí se ve? ¿Todo bien?
Seguimos, no importa, creo que se está it's on and off.
Apagando, ¿no?
It's okay, let's proceed.
Ok, bueno, hoy en día en nuestros países, muchos de nuestros países, los gobiernos, las empresas no conocen los compromisos internacionales que han ido asumiendo a lo largo del tiempo relacionados con la reducción de la deforestación, ¿no? En algunos casos, estos compromisos internacionales han guiado políticas nacionales y políticas empresariales y corporativas también, ¿no? Sin embargo, entre el tener políticas o estrategias y la implementación de los compromisos, hay una brecha por atender, pero quizás también por entender, ¿no? Hay razones, y estas pueden ser múltiples, que explican esta brecha, pero tal vez una de ellas está asociada a los desafíos, ¿no?, que tienen los países por promover el desarrollo principalmente económico de los pequeños agricultores que viven o que explican, digamos, alguna práctica que podría ser considerada no sostenible, ¿no? Entonces, muchas veces los ministerios de Agricultura, por ejemplo, entran en una agenda muy rápida de atender necesidades inmediatas de los agricultores y este tipo de compromisos queda rezagado un poco en el tiempo, ¿no? O sea, las razones pueden ser múltiples, ¿no? Por un lado tenemos el tiempo que tarda en implementar estos cambios, los costos asociados a estos cambios, ¿no? Y muchas veces también vemos que la demanda por estos productos no permite cubrir los costos de los productores y ahí se genera un desafío, digamos, bastante importante por cubrir y que se pueda atender a través de distintos incentivos. Pero en todo caso, digamos, esta brecha puede explicar las prioridades inmediatas que pueden tener algunos gobiernos y algunas empresas privadas también, ¿no? El proceso C2A que hemos transitado nos ha dejado, sin duda, algunas lecciones aprendidas. En primer lugar, consideramos que es absolutamente necesario mantener viva la voluntad política, pública y privada al más alto nivel, para poder avanzar en este camino y reafirmarla tantas veces como sea necesario, ¿no? En muchos de nuestros países, los cambios, digamos, a nivel ministro suelen ser muy recurrentes, ¿no? Y es altamente probable que se requiera reafirmar estos compromisos cada vez que sea necesario. Otro asunto importante es que muchas veces nos envolvemos en cuestiones y diálogos muy técnicos sin llegar adecuadamente a los tomadores de decisión, ¿no? Entonces hay que trabajar en distintos niveles, ¿no? Y en segundo lugar, aunque parezca contradictorio con lo señalado previamente, solo la voluntad política, aquella que se plasma en acuerdos firmados con gran visibilidad, pero sin un contenido técnico resultado del diálogo entre las partes, nos puede llevar a un escenario de mucho ruido y pocas nueces, ¿no? Donde hay elementos muy visibles de acuerdos, pero en el fondo, digamos, no son motores de cambio, ¿no? Y lo último es que si bien mantener involucrados a los tomadores de decisión es indispensable, nuestros procesos de diálogo deben tener presente que el centro de las políticas o las estrategias son los pequeños productores, ¿no? Por lo que trabajar junto a ellos en un entendimiento común de por qué son necesarios estos cambios resulta clave. Entonces, lograr la implementación de compromisos requiere del trabajo con actores de distintos perfiles, y no solamente se trata de públicos y privados, sino que dentro de estas grandes categorías tenemos distintos perfiles, ¿no? Tenemos tomadores de decisión, tenemos técnicos, tenemos entidades públicas del orden nacional, también entidades públicas del orden subnacional, grandes empresas, medianas empresas, pequeños productores asociados o no, e incluso en muchos de estos commodities tenemos también a población indígena que es o puede ser directamente afectada, directa o indirectamente afectada. Entonces, esto implica que el trabajo a realizarse requiere de estrategias y herramientas diferenciadas por tipo de actor, entendiendo sus expectativas, intereses, necesidades, fuentes de conflicto, entre otros, ¿no? Ahora, siempre suena bien hablar de diálogos multiactor y multinivel, pero muchas veces pensamos que son procesos cortos y al alcanzar determinados hitos sentimos que hemos cumplido la tarea. Pues bien, los procesos de diálogo requieren ir acompañados de institucionalidad, una institucionalidad que debería ser resultado del consenso de las partes y que tiene el potencial de mantenerse activa en el tiempo. Esto no es una tarea sencilla, pues muchas veces las estructuras ad hoc, aquellas que se organizan de manera complementaria a las estructuras públicas, tienen un margen de acción limitado. Entonces resulta importante construir bases sólidas de institucionalidad que permitan mantener activo el diálogo entre las partes, de modo que la implementación de aquello que hemos acordado pueda convertirse en una realidad a lo largo del tiempo. Esta institucionalidad, además, debe ir acompañado de un mecanismo de monitoreo, evaluación, comunicación, que sea transparente y que permita la autoevaluación y el aprendizaje colectivo. Finalmente, quisiera poner en relevancia la importancia de conocer y comprender el contexto local y las dinámicas de poder que pueden existir en dichos contextos, ¿no? En nuestro entender, estos procesos no son planos ni directamente replicables, ¿no? Cada territorio, ya sea una jurisdicción o un país, tiene dinámicas distintas que deben ser conocidas, pero también comprendidas, ¿no? Este entendimiento nos permitirá facilitar los procesos de diálogo y tomar acción en función a cada realidad, identificando ex ante las potencialidades, así como los desafíos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Diana, very much. I think key points there about how do you do this sort of process of multi-stakeholder dialogue to assess the commitment, see the gaps, and try to develop this common action plan that FC2A did. So taking into account power dynamics, how do you keep the dialogue alive, I think were really key lessons that came out from the Peru experience. I'm afraid we don't have time for questions to Diana, but she is going to be with us in one of the two breakouts. What I'd like to do is, just because we've heard quite a lot of information now, is we're going to break into two different groups. You're going to be randomly selected, and one is to look at, if you're working with governments, what's from what you've heard, what would you do differently, or what else would you like to do? What do we think the lessons are for working with governments? And the other group is going to look at working with private sector. And then we're just going to come back at the end to share some reflections. So I'll ask my colleague Matthias to break us into our two breakout groups, please.
Yep, 1 minute.
Thank you. And thank you again, Diana. That was super, super helpful. While we're waiting to be broken out into groups, the country roadmaps are all on our website. So you can look at the detailed content of what was agreed on in each of the 3 countries on our website.
Here we go.
Welcome back, everybody, or those of you who are still with us now. I hope you had a good breakout session. I think everybody should be back by now. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I hope you had a chance to reflect in your breakout groups. I'm sorry we didn't have as much time as I'm sure we all would have liked to go into detail and ask questions of our colleagues who had so many interesting experiences to share. I wanted to encourage us all to take a few minutes to reflect on all of the information that was shared in the panels, and again my thanks to the panelists for sharing their insights, and also in the breakout sessions that we just had. I'll start off by saying a reflection that I had from my breakout group, which was looking at governments, actually, funnily enough, turned to private sector. So there's a very clear link there about how are we working with governments, and we did hear some very good examples, to help them provide the enabling environment and understand what private sector needs in terms of ensuring and assuring deforestation-free productive landscapes and commodity supply chains, and how can then we be supporting governments to demonstrate to the private sector that is being done, either by having traceability systems in place, a national agency of certification. We heard the example of in Ecuador. So we can't really talk about one actor without also talking about the other. So it's a really good reminder that came out in my group, and I thank my group for that. Maddie, how was your group? What insight did you get?
Thanks, Christina. And it's good to hear our group was talking about very similar things, but from the private sector perspective. We heard a lot of interesting points about the importance of creating incentives, building off of the presentation from Ecuador, but more specifically, creating incentives and the enabling environment and regulation to make sure that governments have the right enabling environment in order to achieve these goals. And additionally, the importance of recognizing the challenge of smallholders and the fact that they do have incentive to protect the forest, but not always the resources or the support in order to achieve that. So very important to recognize that challenge and to find ways to resolve it. And then finally, we kind of discussed that there are lots of different actors in this space, and we talk about private sector from large companies, but also from smallholder producers. And so we need to be able to bring all of these perspectives together and talk about lessons and challenges.
Absolutely. And I think that was a point that Diana raised as well. We have then these different audiences, and we have to make sure we have differentiated strategies and approaches and how we involve them in these discussions. So I think that's a point that was really well made. As you will see in the chat, Alex has shared the question that we'd like you to take the next 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on personally. So having heard, as I said, all of the great information we had in the panel presentations and reflecting in our breakout groups, what do you think in your work, in your project, in the program that you're working with partners, with governments, and so on, what might you do differently? Or what have you taken with you from what you've heard today that will help you look at things in a more systemic approach in order to achieve the commitments that have been made on deforestation and move them from only being commitments to being action? So I'm just going to give you all a couple of minutes and yeah, have a think and jot down your ideas in the chat. Thank you. I'll just give you all a minute because we're at time, so it'd be great to hear any thoughts that you have in the chat. Or maybe you've got too many thoughts and you can't write them all down in the couple of minutes that we have. So we're at time. I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope that it did give you some food for thought. I just want to encourage everybody to go to our Green Commodities Community digital platform. There's a lot of resources there. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're not a member, please do sign up. There's a regular stream of events that cover a wide range of topics. So I'm sure that there's something for everybody there. I just wanted to end by just highlighting the two calls for action that we had after the From Commitment to Action initiative. It's been very hard to try and summarize a whole year's worth of work across 3 very diverse countries into a short webinar and half an hour's worth of panel discussions. The insights that you've heard some of today are just literally the tip of the iceberg. So I do encourage you to have a look at the report and the roadmaps on our website. I think just to highlight the 2 key points though, what came out from trying to do this process in each country of mapping commitments, investments, and trying to see where gaps are, really did emphasize the need to be much more systemic in our approach, in our view about how we tackle this, especially as we heard from Claire and other colleagues. There's a lot of commitments that have already been made. We're going to refresh them now with the NYDF Goal 2 refresh and so on, but commitments aren't the be all and end all. We have to implement them, we have to put them into action, and to do that we do need to really think more broadly about how we and a bigger group of stakeholders can try and achieve that. When commitments are made or where they have been made, they shouldn't be made lightly. Each one of these areas, it's a very complex situation that we work in, the very complex realities on the ground, and we heard that very clearly from all of our presenters. So taking the time to be able to understand that and work with that complexity does require resource. Diana made that point really quite strongly, and it requires time as well. So that has to be factored into our planning and our helping to deliver on those commitments. Thank you all for your time. A huge thanks as well to my colleagues, Matea and Alexandra, and a special thanks to the panelists that were with us today. Thank you for your time and have a good day and afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.